Welcome back to the second in this four-part series for Inktoberfest. I'm Jules Ostara, and this is my home in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Welcome, and thank you for joining me. In today's video, I'm going to unbox a new set of alcohol ink and also do a totally different type of project than what I did in the last one, exploring with different surfaces and seeing how they work that way. So if you haven't watched the first one yet, you might want to do that. And then subscribe here to see all of them in the series. And you might also want to subscribe to my email list to be eligible for the seasonal giveaways I do, reserved especially for email acquaintances. You can see all the supplies for this project below the video, and also get a PDF with lots of my other favorite supplies if you'd like. I decided I've had this circular canvas sitting around for ages, and it reminded me of an O for October. So even though we're doing Inktoberfest, I'm going with the O for October for this. And it did go through a little bit of its own kind of wild evolution. If you'd like to share your creations, you can do that in the group that I host for co-creative artists. Link for that below as well if you want to join us that way. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments and I will do my best to reply. You can also reply to any email that I send. That's the most direct way to make sure that I see your questions. Let's dive into today's colors and have fun with it. So cheers in that way, to having fun and playing. I decided to close my eyes and mix them up and select one at random. That one fell out, so I trusted that was the one to go with for this project. Always so much fun to open new supplies, especially new colors, to add a freshness to our creativity. The three in this set include poppy fields or red poppy fields, honeycomb, and botanical. You can of course play along with any alcohol inks in any colors and any brands that you might already have if you're doing this along with me. It can also be fun to challenge yourself to use up the products, the supplies that you already have. So I do both, but because this is an unboxing video, I'm using all new things. That was an acrylic gouache that I opened for the first time in the last video, along with a white watercolor paint. So I decided I'd try both in case you get slightly different effects with each. This is giving the alcohol ink something to react with, and I always like adding some white underneath to help brighten it up from the beginning. So just adding water to activate those, using that Mandalay brush, which holds quite a bit of water, and now coming in with the fun stuff, adding the color, starting with the honeycomb, and it even kind of looks like honeycombs in the shape that those fun drips and sprinkles made. And now coming in with the botanical, so I am thinking a little bit at this point of kind of an abstract flower. The titles, the name colors for poppy and botanical made me think maybe adding a flower, so the honeycomb kind of like the center and the red there for part of the flower, like the petals. And then I didn't love the circle that I drew around it. That's okay, it goes through quite a transformation, but I really liked it right before that circle. I almost could have said it's done right there because it was fun, and sometimes they flow super easy and fun like that. The one for the part 3 in this series did. This one ended up going through several hours of changes in the final process, but this first playing, just let yourself enjoy the process and the colors and trust that whether it flows quickly or whether it wants more time, energy, and attention, you can always change it up. So this one I was using just a chopstick there to help move some of the color from the inks with some of the under white paint that was under there already. Adding some invisible gloves to my hands since I can't seem to resist getting my hands in touching it with my hands. So that helps protect your hands and also makes it much easier to wash it off after. Little finger painting tends to help me loosen up or lighten up. Bring out the kid in me. Remember that this is art. We don't really have to follow any rules here. It's a safe place to play, explore, experiment, learn, grow, and be ourselves. So I just grabbed a piece of watercolor paper. I'm spraying it on both sides. I'm doing this partly because I wanted to take a break from the other one. I liked it as it was quite a bit, and I wanted it to dry a little bit from there, and I wasn't sure where I wanted to go next, and usually for me that's a good time to set it aside and do something else. So just coming in on this paper, pure play here. It's less pressure than a canvas for me to work on paper like this, and I know that for a lot of people that's the case when you're working with a less expensive material and substrate. So I didn't have anything on the paper except for water when I first added that alcohol ink, and then I added some white watercolor paint and spread that around before coming in with the poppy color. And you can see the difference between the two of how the one that was working into even just a little bit of water on the paper had a very different effect than the one that's working into the white watercolor paint. And I just love that effect. So I know that that's something I enjoy, and I wanted to show you the difference between the two. And also the difference working on the porous paper as opposed to the canvas, which was not as absorbent of a surface, since it had been a raw canvas would have been, but since it had gesso, had been a prepared canvas, it acted quite differently. I'm just having fun kind of doodling with the alcohol ink over there on the paper. Showing up is part of getting into the flow, and not every piece has to be a masterpiece. You should see the piles and piles that I have of pieces like this. It's all part of growing as an artist, and I think as a person in a lot of ways, because I often learn through the creative process things that apply elsewhere. It helps me mentally and emotionally to process the world and all the stuff out there. So I just added some gold metallic acrylic ink there. I mean, it's a mess. I don't know. So then just coming in with that magenta paint and making sure I still had that invisible gloves on my hand for finger painting, some more finger painting. I needed it for myself to be, because I was making such a mess and it was ugly. I fully admit it's ugly, and giving yourself permission to make ugly art is important, and maybe even crumble it up sometimes. Fold it, but look at those cool effects. And that's what can come from those moments. You can make new discoveries along the way. Then one of my favorite things to do when I've got a mess like that, come in with the golden high flow titanium white acrylic, and that inspired me to add it to the next one. It helped me loosen up so that I was ready to make a bold move on the other one, and I needed to go through kind of working that muscle, that boldness, being willing to do it on the piece on the right to get to where I was ready to do that on the left and figure out what that next step was. So here I'm just lifting because it was so wet. I decided to grab another piece of watercolor paper and lift, and I know that I get these cool effects because I've done it before, and that can make for some really fun backgrounds, especially to take like as a sketchbook after it dries. And I decided I wanted to add another color to this one and not restrict myself to only those 3 from the package. So this is the stream from the package I opened in week 1 of the Inktoberfest series videos. And I love how it's mixing with that high flow acrylic white paint. So I'm just steering it a little bit with the brush. And I also really enjoy how adding that blue stream color added extra dimension. So you've got the 2 tones, the green and the blue, the 2 cool colors now on the bottom instead of just the one green. Adds some depth to it, I think. Then pulling some of that really wet where there's more water and it's more fluid to use, and changing the brush so I'd get one that might splatter a little bit better, to splatter intentionally some of these spots all around this upper right corner, then coming in and doing the same with some white acrylic ink in other areas. And sometimes you can add a few dots if the splatters don't go just how you want. Deciding to bring in some of the bolder colors of the alcohol ink over here, more saturated in the drips and splattery dots. Obviously, I enjoy doing that, and I want to have fun in the process, and that going back and forth between that piece and this piece, it inspired me to add some more ink spots onto the canvas as well, instead of just those little splatters. And then adding some more white over here, back and forth again between the more saturated inks, and then brightening it up, lightening it up again, and It's a dance. And I have no idea what I'm going to do with those papers. They are just a place for me to lighten up while I'm working on this piece. I didn't like those two areas that were very similar, so making a few adjustments, things that I noticed that I want to change before I leave it to let it dry. And I always want to focus on the areas that I love as well, because sometimes the changes that we make can help enhance those. And then a few final touches before letting it dry. After it had dried quite a bit, I decided to come in, because you lose some of the white a lot of times as it soaks in while it's drying. Come in with some more of that white acrylic ink, a few splatters, and then around the edges so that I don't have the raw canvas, well, gessoed canvas, primed canvas showing. I wanted to go ahead and add some ink there as well so that the whole thing has gotten some love and attention. And this is a few days later after letting it dry completely. I'm seeing this face down there that feels a little monster-ish. I don't know if it's because it's October and Halloween or because I recently watched Ghostbusters, but I wanted to change that so it couldn't keep haunting me. So coming in with some more alcohol ink and some acrylic, white acrylic ink and a sponge here. Starting out slowly, changing it slowly because there were a lot of things that I was loving as well in the first layer. So the few things that after hanging out with it for a little while I wanted to change were that face, and I mean it wasn't really a face, but what I kept seeing as a face, and this red circle around the yellow area. So coming in with some white acrylic ink to tone that down, even if I don't lose it completely. And I like using materials that are somewhat transparent, not completely opaque, so that I do sometimes get echoes, kind of a veil through to the, or misty, maybe it's because I live in an area where we get very misty and foggy mornings, so I often watch the mist rise and get those kind of veiled effects of the view through the woods and the mountains. So I like that effect personally, and working with materials that leave some of that so you can still see through to some of the bits of the early layers, the foundations, the roots of the piece is something I enjoy. You could come in with more opaque materials if you wanted to cover it more completely, and sometimes I do that. It just depends on the situation, what's happening in that particular one. So now you can see I decided to change this one up a bit more, coming in with some more of the alcohol ink and then some plain alcohol there to help lift it in the few spots that I didn't want it as much, and coming back into, it's just this dance going back and forth in the areas that seem to need and want attention. And I may be giving it more time and energy and attention than may seem necessary to some in terms of the visual needs for this particular piece. I also notice that that time and energy and attention I'm giving that to myself in addition to the art. By going through the process, I'm working through some things on this piece with the kind of ghosts. There was another face down there that I was seeing again. So I have continued going through some of the figments of my imagination with this particular piece and working through that. And it may be because I sometimes have some issues with paranoia, or that I've had things in my life that have given me reason to have some of that, in terms of having premature babies, or having my mom die when I was in my early 30s, or having my home broken into. I've had things like that, but I also want to acknowledge that a lot of the time the worries and the paranoia are in my head, my imagination. So through this piece, it went through this transformation process that more than what you can see on the canvas or that might be obvious, that was happening within me as I was choosing that I would prefer, if I'm gonna be imagining ghosts, that I would rather they be friendly ghosts, ones that are supportive and beneficial and have my best interest at heart, or sweet synchronicities, if you don't even want to call it a being. Good vibes. So this one, to me, went through this process, and now it holds within it this energy of hope and optimism that is part of what I was mentally and emotionally going through as I was acknowledging the power of my imagination and choice and intention. And I wasn't thinking about that the entire time, but occasionally through the process. At this point, I'm enjoying watching the paint flow when I was adding all that dark area of alcohol ink down there and watching the colors blend together and move together. So sometimes the process and just working with these tangible supplies in this way can help me get out of my head. And sometimes it helps me work through things that are going on in my head or in my heart. Now here I'm coming in with some white to enhance areas that I want to see more by letting go of or covering up some of the areas underneath. So what I really loved about that red alcohol ink over there were these thread-like areas. So I was painting around those to help them come forth more. And then I really love the white with these colors down here. There was a few spots I wanted it to transition maybe a little more smoothly, thinking about the flow. So going back and forth now, I'm totally enjoying the paint, and all those monsters and ghosts are forgotten at this point. Until all of a sudden I see those eyes looking at me. So I did end up changing those up again a little bit, plus just the 2 dots there were distracting, and maybe that's why they sort of looked like eyes. So bringing in either more of the same or covering it up, both can work to change it. And I was having that happen a lot more in this particular piece, I think, than I usually do, because I don't usually work with this much alcohol ink. I usually only use a little bit of it as accents and for the fun special effects, which I love, but it's usually mixed with either watercolors or acrylic paint. And while I did use white paint in this one, I usually use much more. The majority of the piece would be other types of paint with a little bit of alcohol added in here and there. So this one was challenging me a little bit, which is fun to try different things. I kind of challenged myself to work mostly with the inks for Inktoberfest, and I grew and made some discoveries and learned in the process, and I found a lot of things that I really love in the end result of this one, including this area here that I'm working on right now, the way that I kept going back and forth between the splatters, I guess you could call it, the drips of alcohol ink and the white, whether I'm working with gouache or acrylic ink. I think I used both at different times, but going back and forth over it with the white and then the ink and then the white again, I got some really, really cool effects in the original that might not show up as easily or well on the screen, but it looks almost like these cool opalescent stones over on that area of it or something, which I really love. And that's one of the reasons I enjoy using alcohol ink mixed in other pieces that way. And now I'm focusing more on the flow of the piece, how the eye moves through the piece, and whether it feels like it's flowing with ease around it, and then protecting some of the rest of the piece to add a few more dots up there, continuing to go back and forth, trying to get some of the smaller ones that I was getting on the paper more. And I think part of the reason I wasn't getting that as much is because it was wet on my canvas, so they were spreading out more than they were on the dry paper underneath. So if I had more patience, I could wait for it to dry and come back to get those smaller dots and that effect, and I might yet do that. We'll see. At this point, I am spreading around, covering up a little bit more of the red, changing a little bit more of the flow again, and also coming in with some white splatters to top it off, to bring some of those back. That feels like a good kind of adding a little bit of magic stardust or sparkles that I enjoy. And if you're enjoying this too, please give it a thumbs up. And now you can see how it all dried. Most of it I love. I love all the cool effects that you get when you zoom in. I'm attempting to show you a lot of the really, really cool effects that I got here. So it is mostly done. I'm mostly happy with it. I did set it across the room and take a distant look at it to see and was pretty happy with it that way. You can see the thread-like effect there with the red, but I also got some crackle effects, as you can see there, where it was too thick in some places and as it dried. So there's a few areas that I need to fix for that. Some of the effect I really like because it's a circle and it kind of feels like an egg cracking open full of potential, which I like that energy. But there are a few areas where it had flaked off the piece when I went to check to see if everything was dried and it was adhered. So I'm fixing those, doing a little patch job here to fix those few areas that needed it. And then I'm coming in with the same materials I used before so that it still has that flow with the rest of the piece. It doesn't feel like a patch job. It's less obvious. So I came in with some white, both acrylic ink and gouache, and a little bit of the yellow alcohol ink to get it the right color. So that's why I added it up top, and then I could use that diluted color to fill in those few other areas that needed it. And I think a few coats of sealant should be good enough for the rest, where the crackle effect, where I want to keep that effect that I'm enjoying. And this here, just wanted to integrate that a little bit better into the rest of the piece before letting it dry. And then I will probably come in with a few coats of a spray sealant before also using a thicker varnish or gel medium on this one, because I am taking what might appear to be a flaw with all the crackle effect in this one and letting that be part of its special personality. Yet I still want to make sure that it has the integrity and longevity to not be flaking off, so that's why I want to make sure I come over it with several coats. I haven't decided what I'm going to call it yet. I have a few titles that I'm considering, which I might share in the description, and I'd love to hear if you'd like to share in the comments what you would call this one. Sometimes I hang out with them for a while and then I decide that they're going to change after all. If you have any pieces like that, that's one of the things we do in the Painted Ladies online course that I host about the art of transformation. We take them whether it's beginning to finish or beginning again to finish. You can see a link to that in the description. If you'd like to donate to Practice Reciprocity, there's a link for that in the description, as well as my online shop if you'd like to browse there. Thanks for joining me.